We've been talking there in the bulletin about that speech Manuel Valls made to Parliament yesterday, his first as Prime Minister. He had plenty to say on the economy, plenty to say on taxes in particular.
Yeah, it seemed like quite a break, in fact, of the recent sort of speeches we've had around budgets in France, where the talk has all been about cuts and austerity. In this case, there was, in fact, some good news for taxpayers. Low-paid workers are going to see the social charges that they paid reduced, those close to or on the minimum wage. For businesses, though, there was a little bit more to celebrate. The Prime Minister announced a removal of payroll taxes for workers who are earning the minimum wage, and also a reduction of charge those earning up to 3.5 times that, which covers the majority of workers here in France. In fact, corporation tax too, not something that we had expected. That's going to fall to 28% by 2020, a level actually far below where it is now. It stands about 35% and would bring it more into line with some of its neighbours.
Now, all that, of course, Stephen, is going to cost money. A lot of it, and money that the French government, for now, doesn't have.
Indeed, and that's the dilemma facing the government too. They've their payroll tax cut, something that had been announced previously as part of President Francois Hollande's so-called Responsibility Pact, a pledge to try to get businesses to create jobs. That counts up to 30 billion euros. But the two new cuts announced by the Prime Minister, that corporation tax reduction and that reduction for employees and social charges, add up to another 11 billion euros. Now, the French government already said it needs to find 50 billion in cuts in public spending by 2017. We're expecting to get full details of that in 2 weeks' time, but there were some details announced by Manuel Valls. We know that 19 billion will go from the budget for public sector staff and state agencies, another 10 billion from healthcare, and another 10 billion on top of that from the local government budget. That leaves them with another 11 billion to find somewhere in the coffers by 2 weeks' time. So it'll be another challenge for Manuel Valls to find that money.
The key question, though, in all this, Stephen, is whether any of this will help to create jobs.
This is the ultimate goal. Manuel Valls really needs to bring down that unemployment rate, which currently stands at over record levels of 3.3 million people, the unemployment rate at around 10%. But unemployment has been structurally a problem in France. It stayed high even when things weren't going so badly with the economy, and that those tax cuts won't necessarily help too much. The OECD and the European Commission are among those who've called for France to reform its labour market and in particular to make it easier to fire workers. For many business leaders, Manuel Valls' announcements will only go so far to help create jobs. Delano de Souza has more.
French businesses are in desperate need of turning a page. François Hollande's Responsibility Pact promises to help companies improve competitivity. This component manufacturer for the nuclear industry says his production costs are too high.
There's a 30% difference between the Italians and Americans and Canadians. We have less chance of making mistakes compared with the others, given the disadvantages with regards to costs.
The company president closely watched the Prime Minister's speech. Manuel Valls said employer costs would drop to zero when hiring minimum wage workers until 2016. He's now done the math. The tax credit would help save his company €150,000 over 3 years.
The problem is the link which we have with banks. It's 6 million euros of credit with a 15,000 euro deposit. 150,000 euros is a bit of a joke next to all of this, but it's still 150,000 euros.
Manuel Valls wants businesses to take risks and hire more. He now faces an uphill battle convincing unions and employers that his plan will work.
I looked there at that speech yesterday. In other news, Stephen, in Washington, the International Monetary Fund has given some upbeat news.
Yeah, it's nice to get a bit of good news when it comes to the global economy. The IMF says the risk of another global downturn has been sharply reduced, mainly thanks to improved economic prospects in the United States and the United Kingdom. It says the global economy will grow by 3.6% this year. You can see how those figures break down. The United States doing certainly an awful lot better than here in the Eurozone, where the growth rate is expected to stay quite low. There was some bad news from the IMF, though. For Russia, it revised down its growth forecast to 1.3%, and that's partly due to the tensions over Ukraine. The fund says Russia has large reserves, which will insulate it somewhat from the effects, but there are still some knock-on effects to be felt.
The first one is an investment climate, which was not perfect to start with, and is probably a bit worse, and more hesitation on the part of investors to either put their money in Russia or leave it in Russia, so that one can expect fairly substantial capital outflows.
Quick look at the markets now. A fairly mixed picture in Asia in trading today after we saw Wall Street recovering from its recent losing streak. Shares in Tokyo were down over 2% in trading as a result of the high value of the yen. You can see those figures there. And while the Hang Seng in Hong Kong doing slightly better, things moving up over 1% there.
Finally, Stephen, a company trading in the virtual currency Bitcoin has been making an effort to convince US lawmakers of its value.
Yeah, there's been this constant suspicion about Bitcoin amongst regulators the world over, but in the United States in particular, about whether or not they believe the virtual currency is a good idea. So a company called RoboCoin brought in a Bitcoin ATM to Capitol Hill to show it off to lawmakers about actually how that would work and explain a little bit more about the virtual currency, which remains a mystery, it has to be said, to many people, not least those in charge of making the laws in the United States. Among those who attended, the Attorney General, Eric Holder, he remained pretty sceptical, though, afterwards. He said that, he did insist that virtual currencies like this can be easily used to conceal illegal activity. Still plenty of concerns there, but at least one PR effort on behalf of Bitcoin.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen Carroll, there with a look at the latest business news. 22 minutes past 7. Florence is here. Good morning, Flo.
Good morning, Flo.
We're going to have a look